Welcome to Transformative Principal, where you learn how to be a leader and not just a manager of a to-do list. I am your host, Jethro Jones. You can find me on Twitter at Jethro Jones. Your to-do list is a hungry monster that is never satisfied. For the last year and a half, I've helped principals get awards, get promoted, and find the time to do the work that really matters. I recently opened a new mastermind slot. Schedule a call with me and let's overcome the stressed and isolated principal position together. Go to the show notes for this episode at transformativeprincipal.org and click Schedule a Call with Jethro. Welcome to Transformative Principal. Today, I am excited to have Kimberly Dixon on the program. Kimberly, welcome to Transformative Principal.
Thank you very much for having me. I'm excited as well.
Yeah, this is going to be good. So Kimberly and I met over the summer working on some school leadership series podcast content for Danny Bauer's podcast School Leadership Series, where he has other people host it. And after I was in a small group and we were talking, I thought, I've got to have Kimberly on the program and talk about what it is that she learned when she took a year off of being a principal. And as you know, if you're listening to this, being a principal is a stressful, difficult job. And so, Kimberly, you decided to take a year off of school or off of work. Tell us about how that process came to be and what your intention was when you were taking the time off.
Yeah, so I love what I do. I didn't take it off because I was stressed. I just felt that there wasn't going to be a lot of balance with all that I wanted to accomplish. So 7 years ago, when I decided I wanted to pursue moving forward in our organization as vice principal, my mother had supported me and said, I'll come out there and help with your kids. They were 3 and 5 at the time. And she said, if you're successful, I'll come out. They live in Vancouver, British Columbia, so on the west coast of Canada. I was successful, and she did. So that year, my first year in administration seemed pretty well balanced because I had mom at home with the kids. And when the school year ended and she said, I'm heading back, your father says, time to come back. I thought, how am I going to balance raising the kids, getting them to all their activities, being, present and fully engaged in what was happening at my school and pursuing further studies? Because I knew my entire career I've always taken at least a course a year just to keep myself fresh. And I didn't want to give that up. So I thought, how am I going to do all of that and not burn out? So I decided to apply for what we call a 4/5 in my board. So they pay you 80% for 4 years while you're working. And then in the 5th year, they still pay you 80%, but you get to not be working. So that's what I did.
So I love that idea of 4/5, where you work 4 years at 80%, and then your 5th year, you get 80% also. That sounds like just a really neat way to structure it, which anybody could do if they just saved and lived on, less than 80% of their take-home pay. But the fact that your school supports that and allows that to happen sounds like a really great opportunity. Now, do you have a commitment to come back after that 5th year, like with a sabbatical? Okay. So how long is your commitment after that?
You have to come back for the first year once you're completed your year off. And then I guess if, you found something that you loved while you were away, you would have that 1 year to return to the board. Mm-hmm. But I think it also just kind of gives you that light at the end of the tunnel when things are stressful and when the workload is heavy, that you're chugging along because you're going to have that reprieve in 4 years. So that was helpful as well.
Yeah. What a fascinating idea. And so so typically with a sabbatical, you have to say, well, I'm going to go do this extra coursework or do something else during my year off. And is there any tie to that with your arrangement of the 4/5?
So they typically accept about a dozen, I think, people within the organization to take that 4/5 in a given year. So we did have to put a proposal forward. Mine outlined how I would complete my supervisory officer's papers to become a system leader. But what happened was in my 3rd year of vice principalship, I applied. I looked into it, really. I didn't actually apply. I looked into, what would I need and how do I prepare myself for that course? And the course coordinator said, well, yeah, you've got everything you need. So why don't you just start in September? I went, oh, that wasn't really my plan, but okay. So I ended up starting the coursework. Coincidentally enough, I also got asked to move forward as an acting principal. And I thought, Like, is this really going to all happen in the same year? So I had said to the course director, I said, actually I have this new opportunity to lead a school as a principal. So I think I'm going to postpone taking this coursework. And she said to me, oh my goodness, those go hand in hand. What you're going to learn in the supervisory officer qualification papers is going to lend itself to what you're doing in your new school. I really recommend you just do it all. And I was like, she recommends I do it all. Okay. So that's what ended up happening is I pursued it kind of in advance of the year off and ended up completing it in June of the year that I was leading into my year off. I completed my supervisory officer's papers and I completed my last year of work. So
wow.
I had to formulate kind of a new plan for the year that was ahead of me.
Yeah. Well, that sounds like a very fortuitous change that you went from having double time work, going to school and being a principal to now you're done with both of those things and you have a year off. So how did you decide what to do with your year off and what were your priorities going into that year off?
I think I realized I had been working really hard. So travel was definitely a goal. My kids are 11 and 13 now. So last year they were in grade 5 and 7. So I had to operate within the parameters of they were in school and I wasn't willing to pull them out. So I started off looking at opportunities as an educator. And so one came up for the summer in South Korea to be the principal of a summer school, English summer school program for 3 weeks. So I applied for that and that was granted that opportunity. And so then I made arrangements to have my kids meet me in South Korea. And then we went down to the Philippines. A lot of the schools in Toronto are heavily populated with students from the Philippines. And I thought it would be a neat experience to be able to speak with them firsthand about my own experience in the Philippines. So after we were in South Korea, we went over to the Philippines, to Manila and Palawan, and just kind of saw firsthand life there, food there, just made the best of it. And then from there, I just thought, okay, this is how the year's going to unfold. I'm going to be very present as a mother. I'm going to make sure I make time for myself. And then I started diving into, as always, my own form of professional development. So just audiobooks and connecting with other educators and seeing what other opportunities lie. And that's how I ended up meeting Danny Bauer, actually. So, the year itself was very unplanned. And I think that was also a positive thing because it allowed me just to explore where each season would take me. And I could build on the experiences that I was having with both my kids and myself in terms of professional growth and just kind of see where everything led.
Yeah. In Kodiak, Alaska, where I was before Fairbanks, we had a lot of students from the Philippines as well. And so we had, wonderful people, had great work ethic and just really upstanding human beings. And I learned a phrase that was matigas ang ulo ko, which is Tagalog for I am hard-headed. And you can change that to matigas ang ulo mo, which is you are hard-headed. And, when you don't speak the language that immigrants speak, they really appreciate any effort that you make to learn their language and speak with them, as well as when you're traveling to other countries. People really appreciate those who try to make an effort to speak their language as well. And so I learned that phrase, and then I would say it to parents and kids as I met them. And it's one of those phrases that they all laugh at and they all think is really funny because it's not typically something that a school principal would say to people, but it's a funny term. And so they all get a kick out of it. And it was a great way to build rapport and connection with them. And then that was all I could ever say. And so then I would need a translator or whatever to help. But what a great experience for you to be able to go there and see their home country. How has that impacted you now that you're back in the thick of things and having that cultural experience to reflect back upon?
So I think you raised such a great point. I traveled with a dozen educators from my own board. And I always say I learned so much from them because they were such savvy travelers and so open-minded. And that was one of the things they taught me is like, try to learn as much of the language as you can really even if you think they're mispronouncing, just a little bit of communication with them in their own tongue is well appreciated. And I just think just being open to experiences and open to new learning is something that I brought back. Like the way we are in Canada sometimes seems very Eurocentric. And yet our populations within schools are so diverse. So it's interesting to go somewhere where the flip is true, and we were the foreigners and we were the minorities, and how were we received, and how did they set up the curriculum, and how did they communicate with us, and how were we welcomed. And so even just, I feel like just the experience of being the other, which some people would say, oh, don't say that, Kimberly, but
Yeah.
so often, right? Like that's how kids will feel in the school, right? So valuing that little bit of connection that you can make with them, having experienced that firsthand myself, was just a different perspective when I went into the school. I do find, I am a Black woman, and I do find when I lead in schools, all racialized groups are very excited because they haven't often had that opportunity to have someone who is Black or from a minority group be in charge. And I think that was surprising to me at my first school, whereas I've embraced that more at my second school. And I understand where they're coming from, because they're like, neither of us are the other anymore. And so there's a point of connection right away that we can build on, which has been wonderful.
Yeah, that's really fascinating. And, most would describe you as one of the other already, but then you really describe yourself as one of the other when you went to visit the Philippines. I think that's such a humble way to approach that, Kimberly, and such a honorable way, respecting those that are in your community. And I just really commend you for that, because you don't have to think that way, and yet you do. And I know how powerful it is to have representation in leadership from in our schools, where kids can see someone that looks like them in a leadership role that really does make a difference. So let's talk about the rest of your year and some of the other things that you did, especially relating to preparing yourself to go back into a principal position, and what you would be experiencing and how you prepared yourself for that.
I think one of the main things I respected more was the balance that's needed in life to be at your best. I think that there's a certain mentality that, you work hard and that makes you better. And without the balance of it all is where, we run into this idea of burnout and stress. And I think I just kind of respect my time a bit more and honor the work that I'm doing when I'm doing it, so that it's not about putting in more time. It's about putting myself well into the time that I have. When I was off, I really tried to focus on having renewal of my physical being, renewal of my spiritual being, renewal of my intellectual being, caved into each of my days. Like it was amazing how time flies. And it's something that I said, I know it's easy to get swept up once I go back into school. And sure enough, I did. I'm not going to say that didn't happen. In September, my new school is downtown. So it's about an hour drive from my own home. And so I leave at 6:30, 6:45 in the morning. So I said, oh, well, then I've got to leave at 3:30, but yet I was leaving at 5. So, it took a while to remind myself how valuable it is and how much more focused I am when I do make time for other things beyond the school day, when I don't make decisions after, say, lunchtime. And I tell people, you know what, I'm going to think about that. I'm going to sleep on it and I'll get back to you tomorrow. It always seems so rush before, like, oh, everyone wants a decision and everyone's asking things of me, and I wanted to do it in a timely fashion. I thought timely fashion meant right away. And now I'm more maybe pensive about the decisions that I make. Sometimes it's the same thing I thought I would do at 2:00, but I just don't communicate it till the morning. But it's just not having that rushed approach and really respecting my time when I'm not at school and when I'm not on, which I can see that my kids value. So I think one of the difficult things is giving a lot of yourself to other people's children, and a somewhat sense of a little bit of resentment when you come home and you have no patience left, and you're tired and you're short-tempered, and your kids seem to be getting the leftovers. And there was a lot of very good-willed people saying to my children, your mom's an important person. We can't bother her. So when I was off, I kind of gave them mantras of, yes, I love what I do. And yes, I'm passionate about doing my best when I'm there. But at the same token, you two are very important. I have a boy and a girl, and I wanted them to know that they're very important. And so that when I when I'm spending time with them, or when it's supper time, or if there's a chance when I can leave later because I have a meeting, to make the most of that time because they're important. So this school year, I've done, I think, a better job of finding that balance. And sometimes it requires you to step back and look at things of how they've gone to be able to assess how you want to do it differently. In the busyness of running a school, you don't often have that time. So I think that the year off offered me that space to say what worked for me and my family and what didn't, and how can I do things differently while still doing, a great job at work and a good job at home.
Mm-hmm. So what are okay, so I'm going to ask that question in a second. First, I want to say that the comment you made about it's about putting myself well into the time I have. Boy, Kimberly, that was just like, oh, that was so powerful, because it's about taking that different approach. I work with, a lot of school districts and schools all over the country, and everybody seems to be struggling with this idea. Everybody says they want more time, and having more time isn't going to solve any of the problems, because, as you said, the time just, goes by so quickly and fills up so quickly. It's really about determining how you're going to put yourself into the time that you have. And I just love that approach. I think that is so incredibly powerful. Do you have anything else to add to that? Because I think that you brushed past it like it was, yeah, I totally get this now, but we haven't had a year off to contemplate and ponder this. So give me a little more insight into it.
Part of it is, like, people often said, oh, you're really organized. And I think that part of that organization is having a purpose for my days. So, if I set out to say, this is the time that I want to be here because I want dedicated time before my staff arrive at the school. When I'm at the school, I have 2 floors at my school now. So one of the things I mapped out for putting myself well into my time was that I would have to go to each floor once before every natural break in the day. And that might sound like, oh my gosh, that's very specific. But, the first time I went all the way to the 3rd floor, I was a little bit breathless. I was concerned about that. But aside from that, I knew I would be deterred from going there because I thought it's a long way up. So I set those parameters so that, if I was going up to one floor before recess, make my way up to the other floor before first recess as well, and do it again before lunch and again before last recess. So, that gives me face time with the kids. Like, my big thing when especially starting a new school, was that I needed to build relationship with students in order to be an effective leader. And I needed to build relationship with the staff in order that they could see that I respected what they were doing in their classrooms. I knew what they were doing in their classrooms, and the professional development, the staff meetings, those things would be purposeful so that they would have like an uninterrupted instructional time, and the time that they were pulled out of their classrooms for professional development or meetings, etc., would be purposeful. And I just felt like none of that could happen unless I had built those relationships. So I kind of did what I would do as a teacher. I made a long range plan. Okay. So my hope was by Christmas, we know all the staff by first name and something personal about them. And I would have at least half of the student population. I'm struggling with that one right now, but at least know half of the student population's names. And how I was going to do that was getting around the school. So a lot of it was planning in advance how to execute what my vision was for leading the school. And that was, I think, maybe it was helpful because I'd had the year off. Maybe it was helpful because I had the experience behind me to know what was going to help me to be successful. But I just also knew that there was only so many hours in a day. So if I didn't plan for them, the day would roll by and, things would happen, but they wouldn't be part of my purpose.
Yeah, that is really great. And so I love how it's also something so simple. It's not, do an observation in every single classroom. It's not, give feedback to every single teacher every day. It's be in every part of your school before each major break. So you have a defined limit, a way to measure whether or not that's actually happening. And it's something that's so small that if you are short on time, you still know what you need to do to accomplish it. And it's not something where if you get behind, the next day, you just do it, right? And
Yeah,
and
exactly.
I think that is just really powerful, and we forget about the power of doing these little things and how important they are to be small enough that it's actually something that you can do. So that's one thing that you're doing. What are some other non-negotiables that you have now that you didn't have previously?
Uh, some wise people, Amy Platt, who's also doing some podcasting for Better Leaders, the school leadership series, sorry. She'd always said to me prior to we went into admin, she said, I'm not going to be away. I'm not going to have evening engagements more than one night a week. And I remember thinking, oh, okay, yeah, like I'll just kind of do that as well, not purposefully do it. But now I do. Like I have my staff meeting, my parent council, all in the same evening. It makes for a long day, but it just keeps things streamlined. And it allows me to participate in my kids' activities. I think that's something I felt like I was missing out on. So often as a school principal, I head off to see the students participate in the cross country meet, or we host the volleyball tournament or the primary soccer tournament at school. And I get to see the kids compete, and they're so excited that I'm able to witness their achievements outside of the classroom. And then when I think back to my own kids, I think, I miss out on all of that. And that's definitely something I did cherish in the year that I had off. I think people were a little bit amused about how much time I spent at my own kids' school, but I just know from daily life how much kids appreciate that, right? You see their growth, especially in, I think, sports and things like we have something we call W5H, so like a trivia club. And so you can see their growth and what they're learning and how they're applying it. That's something that they are expecting you to be watching in the classroom, but it seems like a treat when you're seeing it outside of the classroom. So I'm more deliberate about that time now after school hours that I give more equitably or more balanced to both the student population at my school and my own kids. I think, the balance, sometimes it's almost like a badge of honor that we wear as administrators. I was at the school till 7. I didn't eat lunch till 3. And I don't have that same reverence for that anymore. Now I recognize and I appreciate for myself when I'm more balanced at work. And I think that modeling it to my staff is also an important part of being a leader in the building, so that they understand that I don't expect them to be there for 12, 13 hours. I want their best in the time that they're there. And I want them to want to be at work. So that means they have to have some balance outside of the building.
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the little things that I did in my first administrator position, I was at an elementary school that was a Title I school. And we had a lot of really negative, disruptive, challenging behaviors at that school. And one of my little things was that I'm never going to run in the school. And the culture in that school was that a kid would start acting out and they would call for help. And the principal, and they called it the Owl Squad, everybody would come running to assist in that classroom. And I said, that is not how I want to live my life. That's not who I want to be. And I made a very strong stand that I'm not going to run to anything. And so I didn't the whole 3 years that I was there. And over time, everybody realized, oh, it's not an emergency. We can calm down and slow down. And, that wasn't all because of me, but I know that me taking that hard stance was something that supported everybody in the school valuing themselves more and not being so reactive. And I only bring that up to say, I'm sure that is having an impact on your staff and your students right now, so that they see that, not to mention, Kimberly, your own kids who later in life are going to say, my mom was there for me and she took the time to be there and support me, even when she was, busy raising hundreds of other people's kids at the same time. And I think that's really commendable. So the last question that I ask on each interview is, what is one thing that a principal can do this week to be a transformative principal like you?
Oh, that's a very good question. It's an interesting question, because I think one of the things I learned this year is that I've discovered who being me is. And part of knowing who I am and knowing how I lead is unique to me. So I think one thing that every leader could do is try to center themselves in some way, whether it's yoga first thing in the morning or, the gym Zumba class after work, whatever it is for them, to figure out what makes them peaceful. Because I think that my balance and my clearer vision when I'm leading my school this year comes from a sense of peace that I have with what I'm doing. So I think if other leaders can just also find out what it is that makes them them. It's less about being me, I think, or what I'm doing, but it's about just knowing why they're doing what they're doing.
Yeah, that is fantastic advice, Kimberly. Thank you so much. How can people who want to reach out and connect with you more do that?
Well, I'm on Twitter. You can follow me at One Who Leads, and I'd welcome hearing back from people about their journeys and how they're transforming leadership.
Excellent. Well, thank you again, Kimberly, for being part of Transformative Principal. You can get all the show notes from this episode at transformativeprinciple.org. And thank you so much again, Kimberly, for being part.
Thanks for having me on. It was great.